evening. I'm Dan McCue of Anton Community Newspapers, and this is Insight Nassau. On tonight's program, I'm joined by Kieran Crowley, the award-winning reporter for the New York Post, who has just written Sleep My Little Dead, described as the true story of New York Zodiac killer Eddie Seda. The book is published by St. Martin's Paperbacks. In addition to his in-depth coverage of this story, Kieran has covered literally hundreds of trials, thousands of murders, and such Long Island-based cases as the Long Island Railroad Massacre, serial killer Joel Rifkin, the infamous Amy Fisher, and Katie Beers in Suffolk County. Kieran, welcome.
Thank you, Danny. Great to be here.
Now, before we get into the book per se, I want to backtrack this a little bit and start with this as a newspaper story. Basically, if I can do a little synopsis and maybe you could fill in the blanks. Mr. Seda, who hasn't come to trial yet, is accused of murdering by the book, more or less, murdering by people's zodiac signs.
That's right.
This occurred when did these
started
start?
In March of 1990 in East New York, Brooklyn, and in Woodhaven, Queens. It was right on the Brooklyn-Queens borders where all the cemeteries are.
Okay. Now, you're a reporter at the Post covering, now you cover Long Island now. Were you covering Long Island then?
No, I wasn't. I was working in town then, and I was on what they used to call the deadbeat. I was doing a lot of police reporting then.
Right.
And I was the 6 a.m. startup guy. So I basically on a diet of murder before breakfast. I'd be out there at the crime scenes before the sun came up. And I was on this thing from the start. The initial murders actually didn't make the paper. It wasn't until later, when they were connected, that they became front page news.
Right. Now that's what I was. The first thing I wanted to ask you is murder always a story?
Murder is always a story to people who are affected by it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make a newspaper. In a small town, every murder is probably a front page news. In New York, back then we were averaging 6 or 7 murders a day in New York City. Most of them didn't make the newspapers. They were routine falling out among business associates in the drug trade. It's kind of things that these stories essentially are the same with the names change. There are always families crying. There are always tragedies, but it's not necessarily news. There's just not enough room for that. Only when you find out you got someone who's not killing for drug money, who's not killing for hatred or jealousy, but is killing for some kind of strange design, shooting by the stars, that it's news.
Now, it sounds in a way that did you always feel this way? Did you always feel kind of immune to the families crying and things like that, or did that occur over time?
No, I'm never immune to that. In fact, one of my problems has been getting involved with that. And, you try to feel for people and not with them, but inevitably, there are always cases in which you become emotionally involved. And it's very difficult. It gives you nightmares, and it hurts to see people in pain so much. I burned out and relit more times than a Zippo. I mean, it's really, it gets to you. It gets to you after a while. And you do your job, and you try and help those people. Sometimes just information is helping them. Sometimes they don't have money to pay for a funeral, and you can put that in the paper, and they can bury their loved one with dignity. Right. Sometimes you get these little victories, and then when you do a story, there's a transplant or something else, and a life gets saved, and you get a mother who kisses you and say, "You saved my daughter's life," makes 10 years of that all worthwhile.
Right. Now, what was before you came to the Post, what was your background? Were you doing crime reporting? Were you doing this kind of reporting?
Before I was at the Post?
Yeah.
Actually, I was, in college I did theater and English. I was a writer. I wrote some books of poetry. I did some short stories, some fiction in New Writers Magazine. And I got as far as off-Broadway. I can truthfully say that I got paid the same salary as Meryl Streep and Michael Moriarty when I was in a play with them. 0. It was one of those equity showcase things. But I turned completely to writing after that, and then I did some, then I ended up at the Post, and I started doing a lot of crime.
Now, how do you do